Just a second. My audio is not cooperating, so we're going to figure that out real quick.
There you go. I was muted. There you go.
Gotcha. Loud and clear. I can hear you. How's things, man?
Pretty good, man. Thanks for asking. I'm at my parents' extra room as I'm vacationing in the States, so that's going to be my studio for the next couple of months.
That doesn't sound so terrible. It's kind of funny though. You got the bed in the background. You're like back living with the folks. It's good. It's like
yeah. Can we do intros? Go ahead.
Sure. Hey, Dan Pace here, retired Green Beret, current full-time author. Working on this show with Randy because we want to share kind of some knowledge about the things we've learned and gained through the writing and editing process. And we want to just contribute to the general community of interest on trying to find the best practices for young authors, who are upcoming and interested to write about military subjects.
Yep. I'm Randy Surles. I was a Green Beret, a Ranger, retired, and then I became an editor, ghostwriter, book coach. And I really want to, there's a lot of veterans out there that want to write their books, get published. Sometimes they self-publish. In my opinion, they kind of fall into the trap of the hybrid, which I'm not a very big fan of. Though it has its uses, but it's sure is expensive, and some people don't need to do that. I think you'd agree, Dan. So, yeah. Yep. So that's kind of why I want to do this Q&A and answer as many questions as possible, kind of lead people down the right path, whatever path that is for them. And also kind of promote my internship for transitioning military members. I think that's a good thing, where I teach people to edit their own books, write their own books, and you can do that as a SkillBridge when you're getting out of the military. So I never thought about pitching that here, but it seems like the right place.
No, you're right. And what an awesome opportunity it is, right? I mean, transition's such a weird time. I just retired 18 months ago-ish, and you don't really know what you don't know about the process until you start doing it. And then all of a sudden the kind of cold reality of what you're going to do hits you. And you think, well, what are we going to do? It was like, well, I'll get a job, or I'll do this, or I'll do that, or I'll run my own business. But when it gets down to the actual like brass tacks of making it happen, that can be pretty daunting. And so if you're considering writing, it's worth taking some time to study with a guy like Randy, who's actually put a lot of effort into this, so you can kind of see what the pitfalls that you're about to stumble into are, because you're going to get out and it's going to be a little ugly and stumbly as you try and figure all that out. And having somebody that's done it before can definitely help with that. So yeah, it sounds like an amazing program.
Yeah, no, I'm working with like 10 people right now. I got 5 more signing up in the next 3 months, and they're all great, and I think they're using this. I only get good feedback, so I mean, I kick out the ones that give me bad feedback. But no, I'm only getting good feedback. No one's ever said this is a waste of my time. Of course, it's not a waste of their time. I'm investing my time in it, so there's no one's wasting time. You get free information, free skill building. Yeah, we can talk about we're going to talk about writing books today, right?
Yeah, we're talking about writing. We're talking about getting into the process. But I have one question. It's kind of you just brought up during the intro, and you said you were a Ranger. It's obviously you were in Ranger Battalion, but I saw for some reason some comments and questions about this over the weekends. Like, so what is a Ranger in the Army? I don't mean what's the branch, but if you graduate from Ranger school, can you call yourself a Ranger, or do you have to be in Ranger Battalion to be a Ranger? What's your opinion on the subject?
I would say they're different. Whether you call yourself a Ranger because you went to Ranger school or not, it's not. I don't care. I mean, I'm not as vested as some other people are. Usually, it's the younger people that are more vested in that than the older ones who have been around for a while. But it's the young Rangers that are like, because you weren't in a Ranger battalion, were you, Dan?
No, I'm a Ranger qualified, but I was not a Ranger Battalion guy.
Yeah. So the problem is, when you're in a Ranger battalion, you can't stay in the battalion unless you go to Ranger school. So you're treated like a second-class citizen by everyone until you go to if you don't have a tab, hit the slab, and then you're just doing push-ups for your whole life until you get to go to Ranger school. And then if you don't happen to graduate for some reason, then you're kicked out of the unit that you've spent 2 years as a private and your whole life in, pretty much. So there's a brainwashing that goes in there, that when you get into the real world, it takes a while to wear off, I guess.
And, you know, it's all, I mean, we're all kind of like that to an extent. Like we're all badge protectors a little at heart, where you're like, well, I went through a lot to get that. And if you call yourself that, it kind of chaps my ass a little bit if you didn't go through the same thing I went with. I uh I bump into this problem. One, I guess I don't care that much. I don't call myself a ranger, but when you do a lot of podcasts, what you find is that people will kind of mislabel you publicly, and then it's hard to like distance yourself from it. So I've been introduced as a ranger on like numerous podcasts now, and you're like, well, I'm not a ranger battalion. I'm never going to pretend to be that. But you almost end up kind of stumbling into this like stolen valor scenario just because other people don't give a shit or recognize the distinction. They're like, "Well, you're a ranger school, you're a ranger." Like, well,
Sounds like
kinda, but I don't want to pretend.
it sounds like you've been watching too much social media on friends of ours who are getting dimed out on different things.
There's maybe some, yeah, maybe there's some history there, but it's hard to be when you start doing the podcast circuit, it's hard to be as careful as you would like to be about what you say, because you could say whatever you say, but if other people say it and you're associated with it, you could quickly find yourself in a situation where you're like, that sounds misleading. I didn't really have any intention for it to be misleading, but it's just the way it came out. And obviously there's some people from our mutual group that have gotten themselves into some hot water with that, and it's unfortunate.
I would also say, I mean, if you went through the Q course, I mean, they got the squat this the small unit tactics piece in there. It's not as long as Ranger School, and it's not as difficult, uh,
Miserable. It sounds
miserable,
miserable.
not as
Yes.
miserable, not as difficult. Um, but you're learning all the skills uh, in a concentrated way. I don't know, and then you end up teaching those skills to other countries, so you know it better than. I mean, eventually, a mature Green Beret is going to know it just as good as any ranger because they're teaching it to other people, and then they're actually walking in the jungle with those people, you know.
Mhm,
So, and it's kind of a, all right, you're not a ranger. Well, I went to ranger school and I went to the Q course and I teach it and I did it, as
mhm.
opposed to I went to ranger school and I was in a ranger bat for 3 years, but we didn't deploy because the war's over. So I don't know.
It's just funny. It's funny how hair splitty people can get. It's not any different in the academic community, at least in my experience, that people just get super hair splitty, right? Well, you said this, but do you mean this? Or do you mean that? Like, I don't know. I don't really give a shit. I was just kind of talking generally. But the military is very much that way too.
Let's let's
Um,
let's tie this back to writing because
yeah, yeah, yeah.
this is a good topic for what I do as a military editor, which I like to say I coined that term, but I don't think I did. Um, people come to me because they want me to verify the accuracy of what they're writing if they weren't in the military or they weren't in those military units, or they want me to soften their language if they're military and they're just using a lot of acronyms and they're trying to talk to a civilian audience, or any combination of that stuff. And I've gotten the weirdest things that I'm like, what are you doing? Like I don't know if I told you this. This one guy had a mission, a a Halo jump into Syria at like whatever 1,500 feet, and I was like, well, why are they haloing?
It's like Lolo, Lalo. Would that be Lalo? Like it's like
He's like, and the guy's like, I looked up all the parameters and they can open at 1,500 feet. But it's like, but no one wants to do that. No one does that unless you're going to land like Keanu Reeves in Point Break. You don't want, no one wants to do that, especially with your 500-pound ruck and everything else you got. The whole point of Halo is you get on to the target together. And if you're jumping that low and the plane's moving, you don't have time to get together. You barely have time to pull your chute. And
yeah, exactly.
he's like, well, I checked this. It can be pulled at 1,500. He's like, but no one does it. That's not why you're doing it, dude. And then he
Yeah.
had an Air Force Lieutenant Colonel PJ in charge of the team of SEALs and Rangers. And I was just like, all
A
right,
little backwards. I mean,
well, let me explain this. No one's going to put an Air Force guy in charge of a bunch of Rangers and SEALs. And you're like, why? He outranks them. Doesn't matter. The SEAL commander, well, no, he's the commander. He's like, no, he's not. There's a SEAL commander of the SEALs, and there's a Ranger commander of the Rangers, and they are not going to put their men in under the charge of a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. That just won't happen because he doesn't have knowledge of how stuff works on the ground. Well, he went to Ranger school, going back to this. And I was like, it doesn't matter because Ranger school is 2 months and that doesn't teach you how to move on the ground. You have no experience because you're an Air Force guy and you went to Ranger school and you never went back on the ground because you're an Air Force guy. You hung out on airplanes, probably. You're probably a pilot. And he's like, no, he's a PJ. I was like, all right, there's no such thing as Lieutenant Colonel PJ. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, all PJs are enlisted. Well, who leads them? An officer leads them, but he's not a PJ. He didn't go to PJ school. Officers can't spend 2 years going to a school that doesn't like feed them into their administrative duties. That doesn't. They don't need a medic that's a doctor, a medic that's a lieutenant colonel, unless he's a doctor or a nurse. That's not necessary. They don't go to the field and do, rescue pilots. That's not their job. They administratively run PJs. There's no such thing as I've heard of one. The only one, he was a PJ enlisted guy, got out, came back in as an officer. They made him the first commander of the PJs because they used to have him under something else. They said, hey, we want to put an officer in charge of the PJs. And you seem like the right guy. But he didn't do missions. He was administratively in charge of them. He's not going to jump 1,500 feet halo in charge of SEALs and Marines. Okay, that's just not going to happen. And we had this argument, and he paid me for my advice. I read his paper, his document, and I gave him this device, and he's like, I don't think you're right. I was like, okay, well, there you go. I was like,
Well,
you know what? Don't pay me.
You're the paying customer, and therefore,
if you change your mind, there's a place on my website where you can tip me. And like 4 months later, I got like a $200 tip.
I mean, that's good. But so ethically, it seems like it would put you in a weird place as an editor. Okay, so let's say you're an editor of this sort of thing, which means that your name could be on the book, like on the inside cover is like edited by Randy Surles. Do you feel you have some, like, I guess, cred that you want to protect? You're like, no. If you don't use my advice, please don't put my name on this because I don't want to make it look like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Like, how do you kind of reconcile that?
Well, I mean, I get to choose if my name's on the book. I mean, does he want to add my name if I don't want my name? But most people, when I edit a book, that's not true. The first book I edited, she was super nice, and she put my name on the book as the editor. And it was the first book that I edited out of the StoryGrid course, and I was like, look, my name's on a book. And she wrote a trilogy. She wrote a science fiction trilogy about time rangers. Conveniently enough, and I snuck the Time Ranger Creed in there. I think we may have talked about that. And she wrote the Time Ranger Creed based on the Ranger Creed, because that's the way it would happen with evolution. If they were really Time Rangers, they would look at the Time Ranger Creed and they would have evolved it probably. But most people don't even think of it. The only reason she thought of it is because she followed StoryGrid, and the reasons Sean created the StoryGrid publishing company is so that editors got equity in the books that they made great, because a good editor is going to make your book great. And he was 35 years in the industry with multiple of the big 5 publishing companies and never got a percentage of any but Stephen Pressfield's books. He edited like 5 or 6 of them at least, a bunch of best-selling books, and he never got any percentage of that. The publishing company got a huge percent of that, especially the early ones for Stephen Pressfield, and Sean got no percentages. And so he gets out with whatever his retirement is from that. I don't know if there is one, or 401k or something. And so he wanted to build a company where he trained editors to be great, to make great books, and that they get 10% or whatever percentage he's offering for the editors. They get a percentage of for life. And that was a really big, that was really interesting when I signed up for that, because I was like, I never thought about that. But I guess if I'm successful enough where I edit like 10 books and StoryGrid Publishing does it, then I could pass that on to my kids, and that'd be awesome. It'd be kind of like a second retirement. But
royalties don't hurt.
Yeah. So basically, to answer your question, I get to choose who's going to put me on their book. If they don't want me on their book, I mean, if I don't want to be on my book, why would they want to put me on their book? No one's ever said, I want to put your name on my book, and I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And then usually the only times I do ask is if I wrote the book, like I'm a ghostwriter. And I said, can you
Mhm.
put with, put your name and then put with Randy Surles? That'd be really helpful for my business because I can show, yes, I did help you with this book. My name's on it. And then they can talk to you about what our relationship was. So that's what I do like those because I'm proud of what I wrote and I think it stands alone. When I edit, when I edit the books, it's really up to them, what they want to change and what they don't. And I've had
Well, that makes
one,
sense.
yeah, I've had one. You just like you when I edited your book, you're like, yeah, I'm going to do this anyway or whatever. It's your choice. It's your book. You want it. It's your creation. And so when I look at it, and some of them I only look at once. I look at it
Mhm.
once and here you go, and they're like, okay, I made all the changes. I'm publishing. I was like, whoa, I can look at it again. I mean, there's a lot of changes. You want me to check it out and make sure you didn't cross your wires again? Sometimes I do 3 or 4 edits. I'll give them discounts because I already know the story and it's an easier read the second time, third time, fourth time.
Mhm.
Um, one time I did 8, and sometimes I just do one, and then they publish, and I read it, and I'm like, oh, they made that change, good. Oh, well, they didn't do that one, okay.
That's an interesting point, right? Because one, you talk about like the number of edits to get to completion, but two, I guess you're kind of touching on the difference to me between a trad published and a self-published world, where the editor, who does the editor work for? Like in your case, you're working, I think, primarily for self-published authors for the most part. I mean, I know
Yeah,
you've done some traditional published guys too, but in those cases, you're still working for the author, yeah, not the publishing house.
right. Mhm.
But it would be a weirder situation when the editor was truly like at a newspaper, where you're more like the gatekeeper. Like, actually, no, nothing you publish will make print unless I say it's okay, and that would change the dynamic so much. So it's interesting to just think about what it's like to be like, well, I guess if you don't accept what I say, it's fine. You can do whatever you like. It's your book. You write whatever you like. Whereas
Well,
the other way, you'd be like, well, you think you'd have more representation or more skin in the game. You're like, no, no, actually, I'm the one that approved all this, and it's like 20% my creation.
yeah. Yeah, and I've read articles. I don't know the validity of this. I've never talked to anyone who this happened to, but, once you need to read the fine print when you sign a contract with a publisher because you're giving a lot of your rights away. You're giving a like rights of like what's on your cover. You may have an idea, and they're like, "That's not going to sell books. We want it. We want to drag it on the cover."
Mhm.
And then they may have they may have final say on your title, and then they may
Yeah.
have final say on what's in your book. Like, hey, if you don't do what our editor says, then you're in violation of our contract. I don't know the validity like of this being true or false. I would just say make sure you read all the fine print and know what you're giving up.
It would be so daunting for a first-time author who's got his agent, he's super excited. You finally found somebody who's willing to give you the shot because it's hard to get a shot in the trad publishing world, and then you're gonna get this monster contract, and you're like, to read through
That's
that
why you
and
have an agent, though. The agent should be recommending like this is normal, and this is what you're giving up, and so ahead of time, and you're willing to do that.
it makes sense, but man, just to have I guess, the cojones to be willing to be like, "No, I'm not changing that," because it's 2025. I would imagine that in the publishing world that there's a lot of pressure to change things to kind of conform to what the expected norms are, and there's probably a lot of terminology that they're like, "Nope, can't put that. Nope, can't do that," and you're like, "Wait, but you're changing everything I said, and that's no longer what I want it to be," and you're like, "Well, we own the rights, actually." So the one thing I can, I guess, secondhand say, because I talked to an author, she's older, she published a book, and she's not allowed. One of the things you talk about the fine print, she's not allowed to self-publish her book or to get it into print now at all because they own the rights and they've
Yes, to buy
decided
it
not.
back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so they've decided they're no longer going to put this book in print because they don't want to put it in print anymore. It's been X years. So she's stuck. She doesn't have the rights to use her own book. She can't publish it herself and it won't come back into print. And that's what a weird position that would be in. Where you're
Like
like, wait,
Taylor Swift buying her music back, same thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Except, this lady doesn't have the billions of dollars and the support that Taylor Swift probably
Yeah,
enjoys.
and then there's so I find it so strange, and that the publishers, and there's a reason that never worked for them, but they don't really focus on marketing the books past the first 2, 4, 6 weeks because that's when you sell most of the books, and they got to move on. They have a small marketing team, and they're moving on to their next book, trying to push that, and
Mhm.
But the secret to self-publishing is the continuous Facebook ads and Amazon ads and your return for click thing and everything, and figuring that out. And I told you, I met this guy at a writing conference who was a speaker, and he's like, I spend $500,000 a year on Facebook ads, but I make 4 million. And it's just consistent, and I'm testing out what works and using the one that worked 4 months ago again because it worked so well, and just being able to rotate that through and figure it out. And why wouldn't the publishing company do that, especially if they own 85% of the profit? Like, hey, push those books, keep pushing those books out, and figure out, get a marketing team that's doing that. I just don't understand why they wouldn't do that.
I, I guess I suspect it's kind of like with the Department of Defense. Like that's the only large organization I've ever worked for, and so I'm familiar with its foibles and its problems. I gotta think that a huge like Random House or Penguin has a lot of the same kind of just bureaucratic problems, like being dynamic and kind of changing models and moving toward. I mean, I imagine that's probably why, or maybe there's just no money in it, and the reality is like
I
actually
mean,
you hit
you're taking a
market saturation. I don't know.
so we painted the publishing companies to be bad guys, but here's the truth, right? They're taking a risk. Every book that they take, and even if they're not given an advance, if they're given an advance, they're taking a bigger risk. But if they just say, yeah, we'll do your book and we'll take 85% or whatever, but they're doing the final edit, they're doing the copy edit, they're doing the cover, they're doing the
Mhm.
formatting, and that could be anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. So they're laying down 10 grand saying, hope this book sells. And then if it doesn't sell, well, we lost on that one next. And then
Yeah.
they really hope that they're going to have like five or 10 bestsellers that are going to cover all the losses. And then they're gonna get their money, but they're taking a risk on every single book. And then on top of that, I think what it is there's no guarantee you're going to get return on the Facebook ads, Amazon ads, and stuff like that. So you're just throwing money. It's like gambling. You're throwing money. You're already throwing money at the book, and now you're going to throw on top of it. You're going to throw money on the ads, and there's no guaranteed return on any of it.
Yeah, no, you're right, and I guess sometimes I don't sound very generous toward the traditional publication model, but the reality is, like you said, I mean, it's I just think it's kind of an impersonal business. It's going to be profit oriented, like any business is, and so you shouldn't walk into it expecting them to necessarily be like your special friend who's interested in making you the greatest author you could be. Like it's just not that way, and that doesn't make them evil. It just makes them very business oriented, right? Like the next
It is a
you know
business.
George R. R. Martin, right? If we stumble across that first book and we own the rights to it, and he gets famous, and then he gets the rights to the other 12 books, well, we still got that first one, and that seems a
I
little
got to start
predatory.
somewhere.
Yeah, it does feel a little predatory, but at the same time, like you said, they're taking that risk up front, and so I can't totally hate them. But as a new author, I'll be honest, I see very little incentive to use that model, even assuming it was offered to me, because I just don't see what value it provides so much in today's publishing world. Like I just don't see it. I don't have the wasta to be the guy to walk in and get the big, sexy front table at Barnes and Noble kind of display. So if you don't, I don't know that it makes a lot of sense for a new author. I don't know, but I mean, it's obviously something we discuss.
It's one of the first questions I ask you, like when they have these book pitches to me to edit their book, and I'm like, what's your goal here? Is your goal to make money, or is your goal to be in Barnes and Noble on the table in the front? And he's like, can I do both? I was like, you can. It's very unlikely. Your percentages go down if you want to do both. you can you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
you can maybe make the money you're going to invest self-publishing back, but and then if you go traditional publishing, you're going to wait a while usually, and you may or may not hit it big, and you may or may not own the rights to your book at the end of it. So those are the risks you take either way. But hopefully, if they take you, you won't have to pay any money up front. So that's the deal. That's the trade off, right?
Yeah, and I could see where in some cases the exposure would be a lot more valuable than any percentage of royalties anyway. So let's say I was Tim Kennedy. I'd never written a book, but I wanted to write a book because I wanted to kind of increase exposure, and I wanted to get access to this sector that I didn't have access to. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to write Scars and Stripes. I know nothing about what he wrote in Scars and Stripes. If he wrote himself, I don't know if he had a ghostwriter. I know nothing about that. But let's say that was me. Well, I might approach a publishing house because the publishing house will put your book into a million stores. There's going to be a lot more physical copies of it in print. It's going to be in the library. And then I can nest that into my own marketing efforts, which I'm already doing because I'm basically trying to sell my personality, not so much my literary, catalog of books, because I'm not going to write any more books. I'm just doing this to kind of get my name out. So maybe I can see where there's models that make it work. But for somebody who's actually trying to tell stories and sell them, I mean, again, and you mentioned Pressfield earlier, and I don't know any details. I bet the percentages and the terms with which he published his first book with somebody were substantially shittier than the ones with his latest book, right?
I mean, same thing with Stephen King. Everybody, right? They're not stupid either, right? They do first refusal. They do contracts with like, hey, we get first refusal on your next 3 books, which means you have to pitch them to us first. So they're not completely off the, they know when, on the off chance this one goes wild, I want to know about the next one. Yeah, it's just, it's hard. It's a hard choice. And then if you want to do the self-publishing yourself, as you know, then that's half your life now is the marketing of your book, the consistent marketing of your book. It automates at some point. It automates a little bit, but you still got to be involved and figuring out, unless your wife wants to do it.
And mine doesn't. So do you want to go download some? Go ahead and get the expectation that you're going to download some video editing software, right? Okay, you're going to download that. You're going to become an expert in figuring out how to shape an ad that generates clicks on Meta. I use a lot of Facebook ads. And then you're going to determine how to work an A/B comparison. There's so many things. You're like, I don't know anything about that. By the way, it's also going to cost you, right? I probably spend $300 a month in Facebook ads, and that's small potatoes because I'm a small potatoes author. But yeah.
But
crazy stuff, man.
But ideally, you're making like 500 on your return at least, or something like that.
So I'm not, but at this point in my career, I'm like, if I in 300 in 300 out, I actually call that a win for kind of the same reasons we talked about earlier, where really exposure and numbers are really what you're looking for up front.
Yeah.
But yeah, you should expect to run in the hole for a while, right? I mean, so you got a catalog that's big enough that you can get a little better return on investment.
Figure out the ad, right? Because you got to figure out the right ad that people are going to actually look at.
Yep. And that's more difficult than it might sound, right? Because this is just a funny tangent, but the ads that I've made and been messing with that generate the most clicks don't necessarily generate the most sales. And actually, you talk about learning curves. I'm like, well, I guess as I think about it, maybe this ad is drawing somebody in who wants to watch a video or who's interested in what happened, but they're not really a reader. It's like, well, how do I tailor the ad so that the only person that clicks wants to buy a book? How do you kind of wicker that down? And it's like a whole art all unto itself. And so I don't know yet is the answer.
Let me give whoever's watching here an example. Let's say you got a book that's a mix between Pirates of the Caribbean and Indiana Jones. And one of the protagonists is a woman. So, Pirate of the Caribbean's had Keely. What was her name? The British actress.
Not Kirsten Dunst. It's Keira Knightley.
Keira Knightley. And she was wearing like a pirate hat at one time, or like a captain's hat or something. So he found a really good image that he could use for his ad. That was a pirate. It was a woman, a well-endowed woman with like the lace here and a pirate hat, and she had like a one of those old flintlock pistols here and one tucked in her belt, right? And then it said something I forgot exactly what it said. Keira Knightley, yes, thanks, Erica. So it said something on the top, but it didn't say it wasn't a movie. Didn't say it wasn't a TV show. It didn't say it was a book. All right. It didn't say what the book was about. Like, this is an adventure book, as opposed to like pirate porn.
Yep. Exactly.
People are looking for.
It's unclear.
Yeah. As a result, he got like 1 million clicks and like maybe 2 buys because, it's not a pirate porn book or it's not a pirate porn movie. That's not what I wanted. So you have to be like the best, the newest action book. If you liked the Pirates of the Caribbean, this book's for you, or something like that. That might be more specific. It tells you it's a book. It tells you it's action. Everyone knows Pirates of the Caribbean isn't like known for its sex scenes or anything like that. So you're gonna not, even though you're showing that maybe it's the wrong thing too. Maybe you need to button her up a little bit and make her look a little bit like a professional pirate. So you
Or
don't
it's
have the
family.
sex aspect
It's a
of
little
it.
more family, like a
Yeah,
family oriented. And actually, you're at the wrong age group altogether.
exactly, exactly. So you just got to think about that. I mean, he got tons of clicks. He didn't get any buys, so he had to switch it up and be very specific about what's going on. So
So
that's
true.
just, yeah. It's an art, and you can pay people to do it for you, and they
Mhm.
might screw it up as well, but they're more likely to screw it up less than you are. I guess maybe.
I'm sure that's true. I just and be prepared to just spend some money trying to figure it out because that's, I mean, one, that's just life, right? It's the old like man in the arena, Teddy Roosevelt speech. Like you got to get down there and just do it and get dirty and kind of smear it around. You can watch YouTube videos on all day, and then you start running it and you start figuring it out, and then you can start tweaking and responding as long as you care. But that's the other, I think, dirty truth is you can hand people money to do it for you, but the reality is then they're just people who are taking your money, and what's their incentive to actually really make it work? Like you can't get around the idea it's going to take you time, effort, and probably some like blood, sweat, and tears to make it good. And if you don't put that in, unfortunately, and I wish there were, there doesn't seem to be a magic just here's $100, can you make this good for me? No. The answer is no.
I don't see. I don't. There's not a lot of people who are like, if I don't sell 500 copies, then you don't have to pay me $5,000.
Hmm.
And
That's
they're
right.
like, no one says that because they can't guarantee anything.
That's right, and nor should they. Um, anyway, it's just fascinating stuff. But I think, man, we tangented a little off the Ranger thing. We got real tangent off the Ranger thing. But do we want to circle back and talk about writing, like how you even get started on this thing?
Yeah. Well, let's do, since you're the memoir expert, as on the author side. Now I'm the memoir expert on the coaching and ghostwriting side. Let's start with your process, and then I'll go into my process.
Okay, so I think memoirs are probably a good starting spot because a lot of people who are interested, who get out of the army and want to write, want to capture their experience. I think that's a pretty normal part of the military timeline or arc of evolution or whatever it is. You get out and you're like, I want to get these stories down. So you're, for whatever reason, we talked about all that last week, because either you want to become an author or because you want your kids to read about them and understand, or you just want to like capture this thing that you're a part of. But to me, I always start that process with usually a story. And I'm kind of a story focused writer. I really like stories. I like narrative stories. I'm not the kind of person that's really looking to capture like the strategic context of the whole thing. And so I usually start by just jotting down a story, and I'll think of like either a funny or a serious moment that sticks out in my head that like 20 years later, I'm just drilling into this. I still think of this thing all the time. I just start writing it down. Hey, what happened? Well, why is this so remarkable? Why does this stick in my head? And I start scribbling out that story. And then usually from there, it will turn into an outline because that story has, predecessors and successors that kind of built you into that story and introduce the characters for that story. And then after that story, and then the outline kind of expands. Like I kind of do an inside out writing style. And then, okay, from that outline of what usually becomes like a chapter, you're like, okay, well, let's fit that into the context of whatever. And then, okay, now that fits into a part. And then, okay, well, how do I make this, fit roughly like the 3 act play model? Like it's never going to be that clean, but at that point you kind of start turning it into a story. Like, okay, well, if this is going to be a story and this is going to be a thing that happened, how do I make it engaging, and how do I make the characters kind of start from here and get to here, and how do you tie all that in while keeping it true? And that, by the time I finish that, at least on the books that I've worked on, by the time I finish that, I have like a 20% solution of the book, because you have an outline that kind of flows from A to B, and you have some of the key stories and events written out in the middle. And then what's left is you have to just populate all that, right? You have to flesh it all out and you have to populate it. And then you get into the tricky part of deconflicting it all with other people's memories, which is always fun. All my pre-readers are always like, I don't remember it quite that way. Like, cool, let's triangulate. Somewhere between you, me, and that guy is the truth. We'll do our best to kind of capture that. But that all gets to the editing process, which is kind of later in the game. But that's how I get started. I mean, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and it's actually kind of where I start when I interview people to help them write their memoirs, whether I'm book coaching them through their own process or ghostwriting it for them. It's like, I mean, I ask a bunch of questions. So like, why are you writing this? Who are you writing it for? And it's similar to what I ask for fiction writers. And then like, what's the journey you want to take your reader on, which is the most important question in some cases, and it's the one they haven't really thought about. And it's like, okay, why is your reader picking up the book? What's their problem? What problem are you going to solve for them? In your case of your book, it's like all war books are the same. They're all about, IEDs, getting trapped in Fallujah, and that's pretty much the basics of most of the war memoirs that have been written over the last 20 some years. And you're like, well, I want, and that's what you wrote in the introduction, right? And on the back of the book and the book description, you described a war that a lot of people don't see, because it doesn't make for good scenes in a movie or a TV series, because it doesn't show the action, which is why people turn into a military movie. They want to see victory and defeat. They want to see a war scene. And your book has less of those than most, because you were fortunate enough that not have a lot of casualties or any casualties in your platoon, and you built up a part of Baghdad, and you took kind of ownership of it, and you had relationships with the people there and the neighbors, and they looked out for you and you looked out for them, and that it was an amazing relationship that most people don't write about, and you wanted to show a different side of the war. So that made your book really unique. And then you could put that hook on in your advertising. You could put your hook into your introduction, into your Amazon description. And when people read it, they're like, oh, this is something different. I want to see what this guy has to say.
No, so that's super important, right? Because you, as an author, you start with a story, and you start with, in the case of a memoir, the true account, right? The true account. You're going to pick and choose what you write about, but you're going to lay this whole story out. But then when you approach the editor, like when I came to you, you start asking the questions that help kind of beat that story, like forge it into something that's actually a little more readable and workable. Because you're like, well, what are you trying to do with this, and who are you actually talking to? And I mean, we've talked before, but it's not intuitively obvious, especially for a new author, the answer to either of those questions. I think a lot of times, well, I just want to write all this down. It's important to me that it be recorded, and I'd like to, sell it as a book. Like, yeah, okay, that's not a sufficient answer, right? That's not enough detail. And when you're like, good.
It, it's a reason to write a book.
Mhm.
A lot of people come to me and that's their answer. I want to write this book for my family, or I want to write for myself just so I don't forget it. And I want, and I'm like, okay, you don't care about money. You don't care about distribution. You just want to have this information there for either the people that are close to you, or just because I wrote this book and this is me. And that's a
Mhm.
perfectly legitimate reason to write a book, as long as you don't have any expectations beyond that. If you want to write a book that's going to make some money, that's going to influence people because of what happened to you, and you want to inform people, you want to write a cautionary tale of some sort to inform people not to do certain things while they're in the army, or while they're in combat, or whatever you're trying to inform, that's got to be focused. And that doesn't necessarily include your cat Otis back at home and how you missed him. That might not be a part you put in your book, because that doesn't focus on the lesson you're trying to teach the reader. It might not start when you're born, or 2 or 4. It might start when you're a teenager and thinking about joining the military, and the concepts that you're trying to teach the reader are apparent.
No,
And then you did that really good. I mean, you were very clear. This is an 18 eight, this, my focal point of this book is the 18 months I spent in Iraq. And
mhm.
so, and these are the characters and things that happened. And I mean, that we talked about this, and this is the focal point. But so where does it start? Does it start when you go there, or do you have to get to the wind up? Because the wind up includes your wife's situation when you were in those 18 months. So we have to talk about the relationship of your wife. So we have to go back sufficiently for us to figure out what your relationship is, how long you've known each other, because she's going to be alone for 18 months. What's that effect on her? And then afterwards, we have to probably wrap up some stories of the people, of some of the characters that were in there, and what happened to your relationship with your wife when you're gone for 18 months and 2 kids were born.
Nothing good. But yeah, no, that's absolutely true, because you're going to have, with your memoir, this collection of stories. You're going to have all this material, but a good editor is the one that's going to help you say what you don't need to say, right? Because that's hard. It's hard to recognize So it's like the forest and the trees thing, right? It's hard when you're in the forest to see how big the forest is and what's around the borders of the forest and what's this forest shaped like. Oh, hell, no kidding. This forest is shaped like a big blob. Who knew? I didn't know because I was in it. And I'm looking at the trees. Writing a book is kind of that way too, because you're looking at all these reminiscences, but it's not always clear to you what is repetitive, what stops being interesting because you've said it too many times at this point, or what's like, hey, you actually beat this lesson to death. Like, obviously, you hit an IED, you hit another IED, you hit another IED. Like, is there progression in how you're dealing with these IEDs? Are you like, oh, we were idiots, but now we're okay, and then we got really good at it? Because if you're just telling the same thing over and over again, you're going to lose the reader. It's just not interesting. And so, deciding how you say a thing or what you put in to say a thing. Like if your message is that, hey man, we kind of screwed up a little bit, and this is why we screwed up because we didn't invest enough in, the Iraqis taking charge. We really kind of ran it ourselves. And so if that's your takeaway message that we need to do that differently in the future, then you have to look at how you build up to that message. You can't just like drop it on the reader and be like, and this is the message. He's like, well, you get the, how did you get there? Did you show me how you got there? Because that's the way it's got to be. And to do that, especially in a nonfiction work, you just have to kind of lay it all out. And then you have to be aware to cut things away so that you're showing the right things that get you to the message that you want to generate. And that's quite challenging to, at least as the person who was there, because they're all important to you. Because you're like, I got to say all this, but somebody else can help you look in and shape that, I think. And that's one of the things you did really well.
And one of the things I run into, Dan, is that people like, well, I want to tell my story, and I think people would find some of it interesting. I was like, well, people aren't going to pay $20 for a book that some of it's interesting to them and the rest of it's not. So you have to figure out who your audience is so that you're writing every chapter is interesting to the target audience. And it may
Mhm.
expand outside of that, but you need to focus on your target audience to make a book that's going to resonate with someone. And the only books really that where someone wants to hear all your random stories are famous people because they
Mhm.
want to walk in their shoes, or people who are just who had decisive positions like Schwarzkopf, who wrote his memoir a year after Desert Storm was over, so
Mhm.
everyone still remembered it. It was still in our head. And then Schwarzkopf's like, "Hey, this is the person I was, and this is why I was the person, why I made the decisions I did." Well, that's still current. We still are interested. And I don't know how many people are buying that book now, but when it came out, it was a bestseller, right? And
Mhm.
then if a person, a general that was in Desert Storm at the time, but wasn't Schwarzkopf, wasn't in charge of the military operation, who wrote his memoir 10 years later, for instance, that book's not going to sell very well because by then we'd moved on to the global war on terrorism. Their tactics were completely different. Our weapons were completely different. And so you're not giving me information about how I fought the war with weapons we still, and skills we still have. You're telling it's a history book,
Mhm.
and it's a part of history that's kind of a blip compared to other wars.
Mhm.
We didn't know it at the time, but people don't even remember it, and no one remembers
Yep.
Just Cause, which was even a smaller blip, which happened the year before, right?
Yeah.
so
It's so
so
true.
yeah. So, that's in the moment, you're like, this is the most important thing that happened to me. And then you retire. And then if you don't get your memoir out, no one's going to care about it, that ends up in a historical setting, which means if you want, you can, get it published, get it put in libraries. And then when people are researching Desert Storm for some reason, they can pull up all these memoirs for on it and figure it out. I mean, there's still that now there's I will caveat that with certain minorities can get away with writing historical books, and they'll be better sellers than that other three-star general that wrote a memoir 10 years later, because for instance, there's not a lot of memoirs written by women soldiers.
Mhm.
There's a book, I think it's called This Is My Gun or something like that, is about a college educated woman who came in as an enlisted person in like MI or something like that. And she had a really horrible experience because she expected something else was going to happen, and she went to Desert Storm. Now, lots of people will still read that book because it's one of a very few women memoirs out there. is probably one of the only ones during the Desert Storm era. And if you're doing some kind of research project, or you're just trying to see about women in the military, and you type that in, you're only going to see like 10 or 15 books, and you're going to pick a couple and read them. And
Mhm.
there's another one about the first woman to graduate West Point, which will always probably be a seller, because it's got a certain kind of thing for minorities. And probably, yeah, every woman that goes to West Point will read it, for one thing. It doesn't matter how
Sure.
old it is. That they can read it and say, "Wow, she had it really hard. It was not as bad as it is now," or something like that.
It's true.
But yeah, so those minorities who read, and then I have a friend. He's not a friend of mine. He was my unit. He wrote a book called Black Men Can't Swim. It's about being a Green Beret on a dive team, and one of the few black people that were ever on dive teams in the Green Berets. And
Mhm.
that book will probably do pretty well for a while, because there aren't a lot of Green Berets of color, to tell you the truth. I mean, there's a lot of Latinos, but there's very few African Americans who are Green Berets. And I don't know the statistics, but I don't think it's very many.
Mhm. No, you're right. I mean, what you're really talking about there is, well, one, let me think about this. I mean, one, obviously, you're talking about creating some kind of uniqueness for your story so that it has some kind of separation from the other like sea of books in the catalog. How is somebody going to find your book in all of this? And I think topic narrowing the topic is a way you can do that, right? And it's probably the easiest upfront way to do it, because you can query it, you can find all this out. Like you said, a researcher researching women in the military is going to find that book on the first woman that graduated West Point relatively quickly. I, to me, like the other and I guess harder path is, and I hope this works. I don't know that this works, but if you write a good story that's engaging, I think it can have a timeless quality to it. And the hope is that even though like it doesn't say anything specially magical, it's not about a specially magical event. We weren't like in the Enola Gay or something. We're just like a bunch of people who were fighting this piece of this war. It can eventually end up in a place like, like Tim O'Brien, where he's just an infantryman in Vietnam. He didn't do anything particularly legendary, if that happened at all, in the things they carried. But because it's a really good story and it has those kind of timeless values to it, it has aged well, and people have continued to gravitate toward it over the years. I guess that's the harder way, and the odds are slimmer, right? Your odds of producing that are much lower, but that's another target to shoot for if you feel that your experience was typical, but actually that's kind of the goodness of it. Like, it's a typical experience that I'm trying to write about, and that's a different challenge, I guess, to achieve the same goal.
I'd also say that there's two parts to writing. There's writing compelling um, plots,
Mm.
and I would put like Dan Brown in this. Like, I don't think it's particularly great writing. Like, I don't quote Dan Brown, Da Vinci
Mhm.
Code, all that stuff.
Sure.
However, the plot is super interesting,
It
and
pulls you in. It's engaging, right?
he
It
pulls
just
you in, right? So I I think I'm pretty confident that I can teach people to write good plots.
Mhm.
Good writing, beautiful writing is is almost is almost God given in some cases. You can teach it, but it takes so much more time and effort to do beautiful writing. And
Yeah.
really comes from people reading so many books and figuring out what that actually looks like. But there's some people that are just really good at it. And those people who don't learn how to do a plot write really blasé books because they're beautifully written, but after a while, you're like, "Where are we going with this?" And so,
Yeah.
but those guys are, I can take that person and teach them how to write a plot, he or she, and then they'll be writing a great books. And I can teach someone, but I can teach anyone to write a good plot that's engaging and it hooks you, and you can sell a lot of books.
Mhm.
But the beautiful writing part is so hard to teach. It's not impossible. It just takes so long, and very few people want to invest the time and do it to do that.
I think to me it's comparable with, I mean, it's comparable with a lot of things in life, like leadership. I mean, I don't know, football skills. Like, there's probably a million parallels you can draw, like where you've got a teachable component, which is like the skills that you can develop, and then there's just kind of an attributes level, like, hey, you got it or you just don't. You can lead or you can't. You can become a better leader or you can be a worse leader, but it's going to be within the bracket that whatever God-given talent you have, whatever, however you think you arrived at that, you just have it or you don't. And I mean, writing, math, like everything's that way to an extent. I guess the question is, where do you sit on that? Like if you're a writer and you're not very good at writing, you had a tough road to hoe if you want to be successful in your field. Like you can become better at developing plot, you can work on your skills, but you just better worse off at it at the beginning. It's going to be tough for you. But I mean, honestly, for a lot of people who have a story to tell but don't have the ability to write, I think there are tools for that. I mean, what is the ghostwriting industry for? It's exactly for people who are like, I'm just not a writer. I want to tell the story. I want to get it out there. But there are people who can help you tell that story. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a whole nother way, again, back to what you're trying to go with this. What do you want to do with it to get your story out there if you just feel you can't put pen to paper? And gosh, there's a lot of people in our community that cannot and know they can't. Or maybe they could, but they don't have the confidence to do it because they feel that they can't. It's I mean, it's kind of a thing you kind of enjoy, and you got to enjoy it too, because there's a lot of time that's invested in this. Let's not kid ourselves. Even just putting 40,000 words on paper or 400,000 words on paper, it takes a long time. Even if it's just like average, I'm going to do 5 sentence paragraphs. I'm going to have a topic sentence and a conclusion sentence and 3 supporting sentences. I'm going to repeat that all the way through the chapter. I mean, it's still going to take you a long time. You're going to invest a lot into it. Do you even want to do that? And these are all questions that you got to decide before you decide you're going to even start. It can be a little daunting, I think.
I didn't really think about this before I got into the industry, but writing is like one of the only professions slash skills that people who have no knowledge of anything to do with writing, and all of a sudden like, I'm going to be a writer. There's no training, no, I'm not going to read a book on it. I'm just going to write, and that made everything else. Every other electrician, plumber, soldier, doctor, lawyer, whatever you're doing, apprentice, you're learning skills to get better at the job and at some point. And then there's people that just like, I'm going to be a writer today, and they just go write, and they don't
Yeah.
actually have any idea what they're doing. I had a guy, I edited his book as one of the third or fourth ones I did, and I read through it, and I was like, man, there's just so many things wrong with this book. And I wrote him before I gave my feedback. I was like, hey, what kind of books do you like to read? Like, what are we talking about? What are you trying to make this book into? He's like, I don't really read. And I was like,
I mean, it's tough, right? You're like, use a ghostwriter. I mean, the answer in that math problem of like, what should Charles do? Fictional name Charles. What should Charles do? He has to tell you a story he wants to tell. He doesn't like to read. Hire somebody to tell your story, man. Like that's the right answer. That's the right answer all day.
or be willing to learn, and it's going to take a while to figure it out. Yeah.
I guess I would argue if you don't like reading, then there's not a lot of hope for you writing. I mean, we could disagree on this, but if you don't like to pick up books and read them, how are you ever going to know what right looks like?
I may have misrepresented him a little bit. He said he wrote a fiction book, and he said, I don't read fiction. I was like, then why did you write a fiction book, dude? He's like, well, how hard could it be? I was like, it's harder than this.
It's harder than you might think. Harder than you might think. But what you're touching on is like the certification process, right? Like, so most professions have some kind of pipeline and certification that says, yes, you are stamped and sealed. You are a accredited accountant. You are a CPA. You are licensed to do this sort of thing. And that's the sort of thing, if I come to you, I'm like, oh, well, you have your CPA. Clearly, you're qualified. You're current as of 2025. I could trust you to do my accounting. I think the traditional publication world used to provide that gate for the writing business, right?
Yeah.
So like if you were going to go write editorials, some paper had to pick you up. So you had to demonstrate to somebody that you were competent enough to do it. Self-publication changed that. And I'm a huge proponent of self-publication because I love that it put the tools back in the hands of the writer and put the ownership back in the hands of the writer. But the reality is that means anybody can do it, which does mean that your quality is just necessarily going to suffer, right? Like that's just the reality of it. Like the average quality will lower, and that's rough.
I'll also add that very few people question my qualifications as an editor. I don't think anyone has. Sometimes they ask for references of people I've worked with, but like I have an MFA in creative writing. I have a certification as a StoryGrid editor, and I have been to a couple of the courses. So I have like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, some kind of diploma from the course I went to or whatever. But but a lot of people don't, and they're probably still good editors, to tell you the truth. They're not bad. And then there's some that aren't because they never got any training. They just said, I know what a good book looks like. And then you give it to them, and maybe they read a book on it or something like that. So I think there's a lot of people that hire editors. They don't really research them very much. And then they're very dissatisfied with the feedback they get. It's not like actionable. It's like, this part's not really good, and well, that's not very helpful, So and so I've had people come to me, especially because I use the story grid, which is, there's some structure to it. It's not a formula or anything, but there's things I'm looking for to satisfy the reader of different genres for commercial fiction, and they're like, "Oh my God, this makes perfect sense." My husband's sister's mother read it and said that she didn't like the ending, but she couldn't tell me why, and you told me why, and so that's the difference between, I guess, a good editor and a bad editor. It's not just like, "Hey, the whole story's not working." It's like,
Mhm.
"Hey, the story's not working for this reasons, and this is how you might solve them." And
No, that makes good sense, right? But you can go on Fiverr, and you can hire an editor. You could do it right today. You can get your book edited for, I bet, $50. But the old truism that you get what you pay for is super true. But even assuming editors aren't credentialed, an editor should have some kind of backlog that you're looking at, right? I mean, either experience professionally editing at a firm where you would imagine they get some kind of standard, or just, hey, these are all the books I've edited. Go read one of those books. If you like that book and you think it's edited well, then come hire me. Now, I will say, though, it's funny you mentioned that, because you can tell that editors are suffering a similar, I think, as a community, fate that self-published writers are, because you catch books now in publication with the kinds of editing errors that you would never have seen ever when we were growing up. And you're like, who edited this? Like, I mean, it's just dramatically bad errors in terms of structure and grammar, and you're like, oh gosh, what happened to the standards? But the reality is, hey man, we went to a laissez-faire writing. We went to, anybody could do it, anybody could publish. That means, again, necessarily, there's going to be some shit out there that has no business being out there. The question is, can you kind of distinguish between the two as the reader, and how are you going to make a decision on whether or not to throw money at this or that? Because again, it's your $12. You're going to buy this $12 book or that $12 book. And it gets back to what we were talking about the other day, where if you don't have any name recognition, how is somebody supposed to know that you, as a new author, are worth any kind of crap at all, and aren't just a person selling hot garbage on
yeah,
Amazon.com, which
yeah,
anybody could do.
yeah.
Anybody can put a pirate chick in a corset and sell that bad boy. Like, anybody could do it. And you're like, buy at your own risk.
Hey, like, you weren't selling a pilot chick in a corset book. You were selling Indiana Jones and Pirates of the Caribbean. Well, I'm going to make the pirate in a corset and then get all those people and use the same thing and
Three
make a
bucks
lot more
pop.
money.
Like, okay, Chat
Um,
GPT, write me a Harlequin romance novel about pirates and corsets. Like,
there
it's
you
like,
go.
great. There we go. Ugh,
Um, I want to
terrible.
get back real quick before we end, like, how to write your memoir. I think I have I have a handout I probably should put on my webpage. I'll put it up this week, where it's just like, who are you, who is your super fan? And we talked about this last week. Who's your super fan? When they read your book, they're going to write you a letter saying, "Thank you so much for writing this book because," and what are they going to say? Okay. And that's probably kind of where your theme is going to be if you have one. All right. And then the next part is, what's the message to the reader? If you don't have a message to the reader, then you're writing a memoir for yourself more than anything, because you're not writing for a reader. You're not writing to the readers. That's how you make money from books. You write it for people, and their people are selfish in general, and they want it when they read a book. They don't want to necessarily discover your life unless you're an important person to them. They want to learn something from your life, and they want to take something from the book. And what is that they're going to get from your book? What is that message? Those are probably the two big questions you need to ask yourself. And then start with this pivotal point in your book that makes it different from everything
Mhm.
else. I wrote one memoir. It's called God Never Moved, but it's about this 55-year-old woman that was burned. Did we talk about this last time? I can't remember.
We did. We
Yeah.
did.
So, but that's where we started, right? Let's start with the fire. We had to go backwards a couple and do some setup, but we started
Mhm.
with that was the if I can write that scene really good, then we're gonna have a good book. And so, her catching fire, her recovering, her in a coma for 6 months, you know, trying to build skills back up, you know, almost dying 4 times because of different infections and stuff. That was like 2 years of her life. That was the focus point of the middle of the book. And then it was like what she did after her life. She became an advocate for burn victims, but she also had trouble paying her medical bills because she couldn't make more than $500 a year if she was on Medicaid or something like that. So she couldn't actually get paid for anything she did, or she wouldn't get. It was just weird. And then we had to go before that. How did they get to where they were? Who were they before? What kind of relationship did they have? What other problems did they have before she got burned that were just went up in smoke because no one cared because they didn't matter anymore because we were just trying to keep her alive. And we had to set that scene up. But we started with that focal point about why are people going to pick up this book? Because they know someone that was burned. They were burned, and they want to know what she knows, and so we're going to focus on that event so they can empathize with that event because they're experiencing it in their own way right now, and then see where she went, and then kind of maybe look at a little bit where she came from. So I
Well,
think those are the big parts of the big how you write your memoir. Don't start from the beginning because that beginning part might not belong in your book. You have to find your theme.
mhm. No, you're 100% right, and actually, I didn't even think of it earlier, but one of the techniques I do with this is I almost always write my afterword really early in the writing process. Like I'll start scribbling down a story, I'll start outlining it, but then the afterword kind of comes next and it gets revised a lot of times as we write this. But the reason I write the afterword is the same thing that you're talking about. Like, what's the takeaway message that I'm building toward? Because if you don't set the kind of plot line for your story and if you don't kind of build toward it, you will quickly find yourself writing a series of reminiscences that do not connect to each other at all and are just kind of all over the map. And it's maybe individually interesting things, but they don't build toward anything. And so you're not really telling a story. You're not leading the reader along. And they're like, oh, that made a lot of sense. I see where you went with that. And writing that afterward to get that kind of, idea on paper can kind of lock you in and help provide that azimuth, to use like an old land analogy, right? Like the azimuth to like help guide your book. So I guess I offer that as something that I've at least found useful.
I just before we go because we're at the hour and if we're fine. I just want to pass this on. So this is Jenny Nash. She's a best-selling ghostwriter. She has a platform called Author Accelerator, which trains book coaches. And this is her book on how to write a memoir. And it's a really good starting place for. It's got all those questions I just mentioned plus more. I think there's 15 questions she asks. And so this is a really good starting place if anyone's writing their memoir. I think if you start with this, you're going in the right direction.
It makes sense. Just work off an outline, right? It's like I tell my kids the same thing when they're writing for school. Like start with an outline. Like it's useful to have a tool like this the first time you're kind of getting into it. Otherwise, you're really just like shooting in the dark. And I don't know, unless you're really confident about the story you want to tell, adding some structure is not going to hurt.
Um, I think next time maybe we talk about fiction books. Not that maybe
Sure.
you might be an expert someday, but I'll teach you.
I know it sounds great. I'm an amateur. You can help me. I'm working on a kid's book now. It's super fictional, and
Hey, you
I would,
just
I
sent
would,
that to me. I haven't
I
looked
would,
at it yet.
I would love some insight on how to, take it and make sure that it's better and that I'm not just rattling off a story that doesn't make any sense.
We should bring Laura on talk about kid books. She's really good at that.
That'd be
Maybe
awesome.
I'll invite her and see if she can make it next time.
That'd be awesome. That'd be super because it's a different world. Like everything else, everything from the design to the writing is different. And I mean, again, it's nothing I know about, so I'm always happy to learn more. That's the point of the show, right?
Yep, learning more and people asking questions sometimes.
We'll get there. We'll get there. You got to start somewhere, man. You got to eat the elephant one bite at a time.
All right. Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us. And click. What's the ending we're supposed to say?
Click, like, subscribe. Yeah, we need like the little thing to
like
pop
it,
up.
follow, and
Do the things.
maybe we'll get it out there on our social media a bit higher, and more people will come and ask us good questions because I just want to answer questions for everybody, and I don't want people to fall into traps, write for 10 years and be disoriented and lost and then give up. I'd rather they write the book they want to write for the reasons they want to write it and get it published and people read it.
Just go ugly early. And, just get it out there. Ask what's going on. We're here to help.
All right. Bye.
Later, Randy. Bye.